The royal host departed King's Landing in a grand column of mounted knights, foot soldiers, and supply wagons. Banners bearing the three-headed dragon fluttered beside those of allied houses. The Lion of Lannister, the Falcon of Arryn, with Jon Arryn absent, but some Vale knights present, and the Rose of Tyrell. Mace Tyrell had sent a token contingent in goodwill. The march was long, the nights cold. As they passed Moat Cailin, the northern bannermen joined them. A large Stark contingent led by Ned Stark himself, along with bannermen from Mormont, Umber, Karstark, and others. Rhaegar greeted Ned with a warm clasp of arms. Jon stood behind the king, silently watching the man he had called father all his life, though he never spoke that name aloud. At Winterfell, Lyanna Stark emerged to greet the king, her face a mixture of complex emotion. She curtsied formally, though Rhaegar took her hand, recalling the closeness they once shared. Jon, part of the king's retinue, felt a peculiar shiver. He had not seen his Aunt Lyanna in so many years. She embraced him, calling him my brave nephew. But for a split second, he sensed something deeper, something in the way her eyes gleamed with unshed tears. The next day, Rhaegar conferred with Ned and the northern lords. Scouts from the Night's Watch described sightings of dead men walking, of wights and eerie creatures in the haunted forest. Rhaegar listened gravely, deciding they must see for themselves. The combined host advanced to Castle Black, where the Night's Watch lined the battlements to greet the king. The black-clad brothers looked weary, hardened by fear. The Lord Commander, gaunt and white-haired, explained that beyond the wall, entire wildling clans had disappeared or been found butchered, as if by ice itself. Despite the misgivings of many southern knights, Rhaegar insisted on leading a ranging party beyond the wall. "If there is truly a threat, I must witness it," he declared. Ned and his bannermen agreed. Starks did not shy from their duties, and the North had always stood as the first bulwark against winter's horrors. Jon Snow volunteered without hesitation, along with some of the king's guard. The host at large would remain in reserve near Castle Black, ready to follow if trouble stirred. It was deep winter in the far north, the land a ghostly white expanse. They rode in heavy furs, breath misting in the icy air. The wildling trails led through silent forests where the trees stood draped in hoarfrost. At times, the wind howled, a lonely lament that set even seasoned warriors on edge. Daylight was pale and fleeting. Nights stretched out in creeping darkness. Rhaegar pressed onward, refusing to let fear rule. For days, they found nothing but abandoned camps, the ground littered with half-buried bones. Then, at twilight on the 10th day, the watchers in the vanguard shouted an alarm. Pale figures emerged from the shadows between the pines, figures shaped like men, but impossibly slender and white, eyes gleaming blue in the dying light. The others, White Walkers, they moved with swift, silent purpose, brandishing weapons that glimmered like ice. The king's men scrambled into a defensive line, hearts hammering. Ned Stark drew his sword, face grim. Jon Snow felt his blood turn to ice as one of the creatures locked its eerie stare on him. A shrill, cold crackle filled the air, the White Walkers' language or their laughter. Then they attacked. Swords of ice met steel. At first, the men of the king's guard held, but ordinary steel shattered on contact with the others' frosty blades. Panic spread. Rhaegar shouted for discipline, brandishing a blade forged of Valyrian steel, a relic he had brought for this journey. With that sword, he parried an other's strike. A sound like cracking ice rang out, and the creature hissed in surprise. Where Valyrian steel met the White Walker's blade, shards of icy vapor flaked away. Jon, wielding a castle-forged steel sword, found himself hopelessly outmatched. He ducked beneath a swipe that would have taken his head off, stumbling in the snow. The creature towered above him, raising its freezing blade for a fatal blow. Ned Stark, too far to intervene, cried out. But at the last instant, Rhaegar lunged, his Valyrian steel sword slicing the other's arm. A keening wail echoed. The White Walker's limb cracked and then exploded into shards of ice. The rest of its body shattered as if struck by a massive force, leaving only a thin rime of frost drifting on the wind. There were more of them, 5, maybe 6, The watchers in black huddled with torches, discovering that fire seemed to deter the others. Ned struck one from behind with a torch, and the creature recoiled, its movements slowed. One King's Guard knight had found a dragonglass dagger. The watch had a small supply, thanks to ancient lore. He drove the obsidian into another White Walker, which shrieked and dissolved into a swirl of ice crystals. The men realized, amid the terror, that dragonglass and Valyrian steel could kill these unnatural foes. The fight was brief but harrowing. 3 men died, their throats slashed by chilling blades, their blood freezing before it even soaked the snow. Another was wounded with a glancing blow that left frostbite creeping up his arm. But the others, seeing 2 of their own destroyed, retreated into the swirling darkness, dissolving into the night as if they had never been there. Breathing heavily, Rhaegar and Ned stood amid the churned snow. Jon rose shakily, staring at the place where the White Walker had shattered. Men muttered prayers to the Seven or to the old gods, eyes wide with fear. It was real. The ancient enemy had returned. Rhaegar's face set in grim determination. We have our proof. The realm must unite. This is no phantom threat. The living must stand together, or we shall all fall in an endless night. Ned nodded, pallid but resolute. Winter is coming, he said quietly. In truth, it's here. They returned to Castle Black with their fallen and wounded, the cold wind howling behind them like a warning. At once, ravens were dispatched to every corner of Westeros. The others have returned. We must prepare. Dragonglass and Valyrian steel can kill them. All must rally to the wall to defend the realm. So read the king's urgent plea. The ravens flew across the land. Some lords scoffed at first. Foolish superstition, they said. But others, swayed by the king's eyewitness account, began gathering men. Eddard Stark readied the north. Queen Elia and Prince Aegon in King's Landing called the banners of the Crownlands. The Tyrells in the Reach debated how many men to send. The Lannisters, guided by Tywin, recognized the strategic necessity. If the crown fell, no one would remain to safeguard the West. Even Robert Baratheon, from Storm's End, sent word that he would march north, though grumbling all the while. The Great Council's framework, ironically, gave Rhaegar enough authority to coordinate a realm-wide defense, something that might have been harder to do if the lords had still seen the crown as a tyrannical, solitary power. Dragonglass, once a curiosity, was mined on Dragonstone in a frenzy, shaped into arrowheads and spear tips. Any Valyrian steel sword in the realm was summoned north. Lords rummaged through dusty vaults, rediscovering ancestral blades. The king promised gold bounties for any old blade that might be found, hoping to put them into the hands of capable warriors. In the Red Keep, Daenerys was haunted by the news that her beloved brother king faced an enemy of ice. She pressed Queen Elia for updates, pacing the halls with worried eyes. Elia told her gently, "The king is strong, and the realm stands behind him. He will prevail." Yet no one truly knew if the living could withstand the tide of darkness. As the snows deepened and the nights grew longer, a great host assembled at the wall. Tens of thousands of men, from lords to small folk volunteers, from Stormlanders to Westermen to Reach Knights, all stood beneath their banners. The banners might never have mingled had Rhaegar not spent years forging alliances and preventing civil war. Now, with the White Walkers stirring, they had no choice but to unite. Rhaegar, standing on the ramparts beside Ned Stark and Jon Snow, gazed upon the vast encampment stretching across the northern plains. Torches glimmered in the dusk, a feeble mirror of the stars above. Snow pelted the land as scouts ventured into the haunted forest. Some never returned. Others came back wide-eyed, whispering of an army of the dead. Then, at last, the others advanced in force. A legion of pale figures drifting across the wastes, accompanied by wights, reanimated corpses of wildlings, rangers, and beasts. The clarion call went out. The living formed ranks behind the wall, setting up a defensive perimeter. Archers readied dragonglass arrows, swordsmen gripped Valyrian steel if they had it, and others prepared torches and wildfire casks. Rhaegar stood at the forefront, resplendent in black armor inlaid with rubies, a Valyrian steel sword in hand. Ned Stark was at his side. Ice, the Stark ancestral blade, newly reforged with dragonglass edges. Jon Snow, a knight in the king's personal guard, clenched the hilt of a lesser Valyrian blade gifted to him by Rhaegar before the battle. His heart pounded, but he was determined to protect the realm he loved, and, unknowingly, the father he had never known as such. When the others swept in, a chill beyond mortal winters engulfed the field. Frost crackled underfoot, breath froze in men's beards, horses whinnied in terror. The whites came first, a churning mass of unliving flesh, eyes glinting blue with unnatural light. Archers loosed flights of dragonglass arrows. Many whites collapsed and shattered, but more kept coming. Then the White Walkers emerged like phantoms, tall and gaunt, their ice blades slicing through the night. The defenders braced for the final trial. At the center of the line, Rhaegar clashed with a White Walker champion whose every strike threatened to freeze the king's sword arm. Sparks of frost and black steel lit the gloom. Rhaegar parried with skill, calling out for the men to hold. Ned Stark led a flank charge, driving whites back with waves of torch-bearing warriors. Jon Snow fought near Rhaegar, stepping in when another tried to flank the king. Their swords sang with the eerie ring of steel on ice. Jon struck an other's blade, cracks of frost rippled, but he needed another blow to finish it. Rhaegar whirled, delivering that blow. The other exploded into a storm of icy shards, swirling away in the wind. All across the field, similar battles raged. Valyrian steel or dragonglass turned the tide. Yet the living paid a heavy price. Men screamed as White Walker blades cut them down, leaving corpses that sometimes rose moments later as whites if they died under the Walker's magic. Only fire or immediate destruction of the bodies prevented that horror. Robert Baratheon, bellowing oaths, smashed whites with his warhammer, though he had no special weapon for the Walkers themselves. Tyrell knights formed tight spear lines. Jabbing with dragonglass-dipped pikes, Lannister men-at-arms unleashed casks of wildfire, creating searing green flames that devoured the undead. The night became a tapestry of swirling snow, flaming arcs, and the ghastly shrieks of unnatural foes. Slowly, the living gained ground. The White Walkers, unprepared for such a concentrated force armed with the correct weapons, began to withdraw. Some tried to vanish into the darkness, but the Watchers in black, better prepared this time, circled around with flares and torches. One by one, the others found themselves cornered. A final confrontation took place amid a ring of torches and bodies. Rhaegar, Ned, Jon, and a handful of seasoned knights faced the White Walker chieftain, a being taller than the rest, cloaked in swirling frost, eyes blazing with ancient malice. The ground underfoot turned to slick ice. Rhaegar, sword raised, advanced, not flinching from the bitter cold that gnawed his flesh. The chieftain struck with inhuman speed, forcing Rhaegar back a step. Jon darted in, blocking a second blow that would have severed the king's leg. Their swords hammered the icy blade, cracks webbing across it. Ned lunged from the side with ice, slicing into the chieftain's flank. A shriek tore the night, and the White Walker whirled, smashing Ned aside. Before the creature could deliver a killing stroke, Jon slid in, thrusting his Valyrian steel upward into the Walker's chest. The blade lodged deep, crackling with frost. The chieftain's face contorted in silent fury. Then its entire body burst apart into a million shards of ice, swirling away like snow in the wind. A stunned stillness fell. The others were gone, their host broken. Dawn's light crept over the horizon, revealing a battlefield littered with corpses that did not stir. The whites had collapsed once their White Walker masters were destroyed, leaving only husks. Men wept with relief, with horror at the cost. Rhaegar, panting and numb with cold, placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, wordless gratitude in his eyes. Ned Stark, bruised but alive, joined them. Around them, battered knights from every corner of the realm took stock of who had survived and who had not. But they had won. In the aftermath, Rhaegar ordered the dead burned. Pyres lit the snow-covered plain, sending black smoke into the clear winter sky. The living regrouped, caring for the wounded, burying their fallen. Ravens flew across Westeros to announce the victory. The others had been driven back, their immediate threat ended. Yet all knew the Watch must remain vigilant. The realm had glimpsed the true face of winter's darkness. Only unity and the proper weapons had saved them. As the pyres burned, Rhaegar stood with Ned and Jon, gazing into the flames. The king spoke softly. "I once believed my father's madness would be the greatest threat to this land. I never imagined we might face an enemy from the darkest legends. Yet here we stand." Ned nodded solemnly. "We owe our survival to your leadership, your grace, and to the bravery of many. My father and brother died to a mad king. I never thought I'd see a Targaryen king defend us from death itself. Yet you have." Jon Snow felt the heat of the flames on his face. Something churned inside him, a longing to ask the king why he showed him such favor, why there was a strange warmth in his gaze. But he pushed it aside. He had done his duty. That was enough. Rhaegar turned to him. "Sir Jon, you saved my life more than once. I am in your debt." There was a catch in his voice, but he masked it. "We must see that the Night's Watch is strengthened further. This threat could return in another generation." Jon bowed his head. "I will serve your grace in whatever way you need." Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "He is a credit to the North and to you, sire," Ned said softly, a careful emphasis in his tone. Rhaegar understood the unspoken meaning. Perhaps, in time, they would tell Jon the truth. But for now, the realm's fragile peace still required secrecy. Robert Baratheon lurked among the survivors, battered but alive, and old grudges might die hard if the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna became known. Thus, they returned to Winterfell amid the cheers of men who had braved the long night's harbingers and emerged victorious. The realm, newly bonded by shared sacrifice, seemed to have transcended the old rifts of the Targaryen War. Even Robert Baratheon, half frozen and nursing a broken rib, grunted grudging respect for Rhaegar. "Maybe the silver-haired bastard is worth something after all," Robert muttered, raising a cup to the king when the mead was passed. The victory feast at Winterfell was somber but resolute. They had faced a horror beyond politics, and for once, they had stood as one. In the spring that followed, news spread that Viserys Targaryen had been sighted in Slaver's Bay, consorting with wealthy nobles. Some whispered he sought a Dothraki call to invade Westeros, exploiting its post-battle exhaustion. But such a plan seemed foolish. Westeros was more united now than it had been in decades, and the Targaryen name no longer guaranteed loyalty, especially after the realm had seen Rhaegar's leadership. For now, Rhaegar merely instructed his agents in Essos to monitor Viserys, ready to act if he threatened the realm's security. He would not chase him. If the boy wanted to live in exile, so be it. Back in King's Landing, the king returned as a hero. He had led the realm against a threat out of legend and won. Cheering crowds lined the streets. Daenerys, eyes brimming with relief, raced to greet him at the Red Keep gates. She had grown taller in his absence, a willowy figure with silver-gold hair, wearing a gown of midnight blue. She embraced Rhaegar, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you wouldn't come home." He stroked her hair gently, promising he would never abandon her or the realm. Jon Snow, riding behind the king, found the southern warmth disorienting after the frozen wastes. He took up his station as a knight of the royal guard, uncertain how to feel about the crowd's cheers. He had risked his life alongside them, but he was still an outsider to many. Only Daenerys spared him a bright smile, and that warmed him more than the spring sunshine. A great royal feast followed. Lords from all over Westeros converged, celebrating not only the victory but also the unity that had emerged. Rhaegar used the occasion to further codify the realm's defenses. More resources for the Night's Watch, official recognition of the powers of each region in times of shared crisis, and a vow to send regular patrols beyond the wall. The memory of the battle and the shattered White Walkers was still fresh, so none dared object. In quiet corners, some wondered if now, at last, Rhaegar might set aside the old secret about Jon Snow. Others speculated if the king would arrange a new marriage alliance for Daenerys or for Jon, forging ties to keep the realm stable. But Rhaegar's priority was to let the realm breathe and heal. He had no desire to foment scandal or inflame old grudges. And so he kept the truth hidden, though Lyanna's pained eyes haunted him whenever their paths crossed. Years passed. The North remained vigilant, posting watchers for any sign of renewed threat. The rest of Westeros enjoyed a rare peace. The small folk prospered, roads were safer than they had been in a century, and the memory of the others' defeat lingered as a testament to what unity could achieve. Jon Snow rose in prominence among the King's Guard, famed for his skill and quiet honor. Ned Stark grew older, content that Winterfell was safe in an era of stability. Robert Baratheon drank himself into a contented haze in Storm's End. Tywin Lannister eventually passed away, leaving his children to jostle for influence, but even they recognized the realm's transformation under Rhaegar's measured rule. Princess Daenerys reached womanhood, praised as one of the most graceful ladies in the Seven Kingdoms. Suitors from Dorne, the Reach, and beyond vied for her hand, but Rhaegar refused to rush her into a match. Daenerys herself dreamed of traveling to Essos one day, seeing the lands where Viserys had roamed. She still held a faint hope that her brother might be redeemed, though Rhaegar gently cautioned her that Viserys had chosen a dark path.